And we're ready. Hi, we're here with Jay Fathi, who is running for Seattle City Council, District Number 6. Would you like to go ahead and give a 2-minute introduction?
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Again, Dr. Jay Fathi. I'm a lifelong North Seattle resident. I was raised by a single mother in Northeast Seattle. Had the opportunity to go to the University of Washington and then to the University of Washington Medical School. Wanted to get back to my community, so I became a family physician and got a job at the 45th Street Community Health Center, which is part of the Neighbor Care Health System, part of the safety net system to take care of folks that are underserved. We took care of homeless folks, immigrants, people with severe addiction and mental health issues, and that's where I worked for 12 years. After that, I was able to start a community health program at Swedish. We further bolstered and upgraded services for marginalized populations and underserved populations. And after that, I had the amazing opportunity to be the CEO of an Obamacare health plan. For 5.5 years, I ran one of the health plans for Medicaid and Exchange, which had 250,000 people across Washington on it. Again, generally, all of these folks did not have health insurance before, so they were, again, marginalized populations. I've lived in the district, District 6, for 21 years with my wife, who's a nurse practitioner and a professor at the University of Washington. We are raising 2 boys, and we're proud public school parents. We're huge believers in public schools and the Seattle public school system. And I'm running because I care about my city of my whole life extremely deeply. I've worked extensively in the community my entire life. I see a need, particularly right now, for evidence-based solutions to our city's problems, which is the way physicians and healthcare looks at things, evidence-based. And I look forward to bringing a healthier, collaborative leadership style to the council. And I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and get started here with us. Oh, sorry, Summer.
If elected, what policies do you support to address the need for affordable housing and homelessness services?
Well, that was a very general question. Policies that I support, I guess that's why it's good to have this again, to address the need for affordable housing and homeless services. Well, those things are obviously inextricably linked. One of the reasons we're having a worsening homelessness crisis is because of the unaffordability of our system and our housing situation here. And as I assume most of you know, that increasing rents correlate with increasing homelessness. And unaffordability and the chasm that we have in our city is marked right now. As far as homelessness, the path to someone becoming homeless from when they were born and they were someone's baby to when they become homeless is very long and very complex for every individual, and everyone has their own path. It has to do with a confluence of factors, usually involving poverty, childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, adult trauma, domestic violence, job loss, unaffordable housing, mental health issues, addiction issues. These are very, very complicated issues. So we have a lot of things in place in our city that are helping those in those areas. We need to do a lot more. Have lots of ideas about those things. A lot of them have to do with expanding healthcare coverage and expanding and investing more in permanent supportive housing for the chronically mentally ill, which we already have some, and we need more of that. There are, as far as the housing situation, particularly for the chronically mentally ill that are homeless, again, the permanent supportive housing, which is already offered by organizations like Plymouth and DESC, and I have good working relationships with those organizations and their leaders. We need more of that. And as far as affordability, we have to continue to work along the lines of things like impact fees and working on our zoning to increase our density. And again, it's complex, and I guess we'll have to leave that for another time as far as details. As I see the red card. That's a lot in 2 minutes. That's a lot.
So Seattle has the most regressive tax code in the state, with the most regressive tax code in the country. Given the repeal of the head tax and the ongoing litigation over the city income tax, how would you raise more progressive revenue to help fund city services?
Well, you do hear people say, oh, we're spending so much money on homeless services, on just the homeless issue. When I see those questions about city services, we are spending a lot, and it does need to be more coordination between the county and within the city and with the nonprofits that are contracted with the city to help more wisely spend those funds. However, things that I brought up, such as permanent supportive housing for the chronically mentally ill, who I've had patients who live in such a situation. These things are cost effective. They are very clearly the right thing to do. They're the ethically right thing to do for the chronically mentally ill. And you put them in housing and give them support services. Those people in the city who have lived in such dwellings for over 20 years, it costs money. So we're gonna need more funding for that. I don't think raising property taxes is the right thing, and we're certainly not gonna do anything that's regressive. We already have, as you said in the question, the most regressive tax system in the country that is an undue burden on the poor, and that's unacceptable. We need to look at variations of things as we discussed in 2018, and the taxes are gonna need to come on bigger businesses and corporations, not on small businesses, not on independent businesses, but we're talking about big corporations, and we're gonna need to work with them and come up with some productive ways where we can collaborate and come up with more revenue for that. There's certainly other things we can do to raise revenue for city services in general, and I don't know if there's, not looking ahead, but I know there's a lot of people talking about congestion pricing, congestion tax downtown for drivers. I think that's something we need to explore for a multitude of reasons. Most importantly, not simply as a lever to raise revenue, but more importantly to help protect the planet, which climate change is an extremely real thing, and we need to continue to do everything we can to get people out of their cars and work on mass transit and getting people out of their cars. So that's that would result in more revenue also. And I could go on.
Thank you. Matthew?
Given the city's reset of the Move Seattle levy, the upcoming expiration of the city's bus funding tax, and the planning for light rail throughout much of our district, what will be your priorities in deciding how the city spends its transportation funds?
Yes, excellent question that I kind of started entering into my last answer. I have had experience managing a budget of almost $1 billion. So I'm not intimidated or scared by lots of zeros after numbers. I also know how to, what needs to be done, granted not in a city government setting, to effectively manage funds. I'm sure it's different in a city government, from a city government standpoint. As far as prioritizing, I think I touched on it in my last answer. We have to prioritize getting people out of their cars as much as possible. Cities over the last 100 years have been designed around cars. That's just something that at least my generation just completely accepts and takes for granted. We don't think about, for example, a culture that's more bicycle friendly. People talk about these bicycles that are being used, which is great. They're just left on sidewalks. So we can't have them blocking sidewalks, but people talk about the unsightliness of the bicycles. And I had a good friend say, how come no one ever talks about the unsightliness of the cars? Look at all those large four-wheeled things across the street there, Jay. Look at those things. Someone had the audacity to just leave them there. And I said, that is a really good point, and I'm learning a lot being a candidate. I can't argue with that. We need to become more of a bicycle-friendly city. We need to prioritize funds to logically, again, prioritize mass transit. We're on the right track, although we're about 3 decades behind with light rail and mass transit. Unfortunately, 50 years ago, I wasn't a voter back then. I was a little tyke. We voted down mass transit. We have it now, and the train is moving. The other thing we need to make sure we do, particularly, I brought up, for example, this consideration of a congestion tax, congestion fee. We need to make sure that anything that we do is not regressive and not an undue burden on the poor or the working class.
Thank you. And let's see, we were.
No, it's my turn.
Question.
You want to do it?
Yes, I
Okay.
can ask a question and do the stopwatch at the same time. I am curious what is happening elsewhere. It's very rhythmic.
It's like an aerobics class.
Is it clogging?
2 floors up was people speaking Swedish, I think.
Yeah.
I think so.
And this floor was just a bunch of people sitting in a room this big, like looking at each other. I wasn't sure what they were waiting for.
So we're
Awesome.
rolling.
Yes,
So
sorry.
we're-
Sorry. How will you continue the process of reforming the Seattle Police Department beyond the expiration of the consent decree?
Excellent question. Not surprised from you guys. I have not been asked that question. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, you can't make decisions without having ample information from talking to lots of different people. And I've said it over and over again, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, and that's something that I'm going to take with me to City Hall, is to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. There is a lot of people that are both on the civilian side and the police force side that have been working on this for a long, long time in our city. I need to learn more about it. I have a ride-along scheduled in Pioneer Square coming up. I have connections with people that have served on the police force. I'm talking to people when I can. I met City Attorney Pete Holmes for the first time recently, just so we can begin having a relationship. I look forward to meeting Dan Satterberg. These are things that I don't know what other candidates will say, but I'm not going to commit at this point. It would be disingenuous to say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But there's absolutely no question that we are going to need to continue to have, I guess, continue the process of reforming. I can't even speak to the fact of what exactly the details of the consent decree, what needs to continue to be reformed. But there's, I don't think it's going to make sense to just have it, once it's lifted, that people say, okay, everything's great. There's no way we're going to have internal and external controls to make sure that the police department our police officers are working in the manner in which they are, the standards that they should be with the consent decree, and at the same time, they're supported and staffed appropriately to provide the public safety that we need in our city.
Thank you. And now we'll move into our follow-up questions, 1 minute answers each. We'll go Summer, Laura, Ben, Alice.
I want to delve a little bit more into the question about progressive revenue to help fund our city services. You mentioned that you kind of quickly but didn't give any particulars, and would like to get into the particulars of funding big business and corporations. You mentioned you wanted to work with them, but more than business makes up this city, and wanted to find out what kind of thoughts are you having regarding funding big business and corporations, and are you going to only look to solutions that big business would itself agree with?
No. First of all, no. And second of all, to be clear, and I submitted the King County questionnaire last night. So I support the state income tax, without question. It's immoral what we're doing with our tax system. It's incredible. Also, when you consider how proud we all are, and I'm saying this firsthand as a lifetime Seattleite and lifetime Washingtonian, of all the innovative, progressive things we do, that our tax structure is so backwards. It's just wrong. It doesn't fit with everything else. So when I say what I did, I mean draconian doesn't work. I worked for big business. I worked for an investor-led company, and it was demystified to me. So I'm talking about having conversations with saying, this is what we need to do. These are the facts that show that we need to do it. You're very smart, you're successful at what you do, come up with some ideas. And we'll see if we can work together on that. And if they're not ideas that we like, then we'll come up with our own ideas.
Okay. Thank you. I think I had Laura next.
Good question.
What is your position on harm reduction models to help combat the opioid epidemic?
Yeah, harm reduction models I have been employing from when I was in medical school, first starting to see patients. And again, I assume you're asking the question so people know what it's all about. There's different degrees and different levels, whether it's for any destructive behavior, but certainly for addictive behaviors. There's different medications, obviously, that we use, including when people have mental health diagnoses and they have an addiction. When I was first trained, the dogma was you cannot treat the mental health diagnosis until you get them off the addictive substance, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever because they're interlinked. So harm reduction can also be treating someone's mental health issues with medications in hopes that that's going to decrease their addictive, destructive behaviors. There is a model that people are bringing up that I think you may be alluding to regarding injection drug use. There is a grand total of one place in North America that's been doing that. It's got mixed results in Vancouver. Again, people are talking about that. And so I think the jury's still out on that.
Thank you. Ben?
Did you give me the 10-second on that one?
No, I don't. I think I forgot to give you the 10. It's hard with the minute because I feel like if I'm gonna be like,
I was actually planning on the 10 seconds.
Okay, you'll get 10 seconds.
Ben, go ahead.
According to the most recent count of homeless folks, how many homeless folks do we have in King County?
Well, it's been, the one night count is at 12,000 and 12,000 plus, and then the recent one that came out was 11,000.
And
Slight decrease.
of those, how many are native to King County or Seattle?
The latest statistics I saw, again, so before the numbers I saw were 12,000, and again, this is an imprecise count because it is impossible to take stock of every unsheltered individual because of obvious things. But if we say the same methodologies are used, it's directionally correct. 12,000 plus, and I saw 6% with that number. And the latest number I saw was 11,000 plus, and I believe it was closer to 18% from outside. That's something I just saw from a survey. So yeah. I have a lot more to say about that, but that's your question. So.
What are your ideas for kind of, so we've talked about solutions for people experiencing homelessness, but what are your solutions for kind of like the missing middle housing? And then specifically, or maybe a corollary, is your perspective on changing the zoning expectations in single family neighborhoods?
Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. I mean, when you talk about, in a way, you're addressing, I think, what in some ways people refer to as the pipeline to homelessness, like the pre-step, right? And there's organizations like Queen Anne Helpline, right here, run by a friend of mine who provides that emergency assistance for that last step. And someone's like, they don't have an extra $500 and they need to come up with it or they're gonna become homeless. So we have to continue to be creative, and I need to learn more about different levers that we have, mechanisms and structures. You know, impact fees, in a perfect world, the impact fees are going to fund housing that's affordable for people in that community that are being displaced by the development. I mean, I just try to keep it simple. That's what the intent is. We need to make sure that that problem is what is being solved by the current system. I've talked to a lot of people in my neighborhood that say, hey, I've lived and worked here for my whole life. I'm 60 years old, I don't have a family, I'm a renter, and I want to age in place and I don't want to move. And they're fearing that. Answer, Sony.
No, a minute's not very much time.
Okay, and Matt?
All right, so I wanted to follow up on Ben's question. You mentioned the one night count, and you also used the term unsheltered. Do you believe all homeless people are unsheltered?
I have never, so I have a minute on this one, right? That's a good question. So,
I want to do a bit of a rapid fire, so just yes or no for that first one, or maybe.
okay, so should I just say it again then?
Do you believe all homeless people are unsheltered?
No.
Okay, so the one night count only counts unsheltered homeless people,
Right.
And that was the only data you used. So as someone who talked about using data-driven and evidence-based solutions, what data are you going to gather between now and election night to get more accurate data on how many homeless people there are and the needs of folks who maybe aren't the ones that are complained about on Facebook as often?
Well, I think it's a parallel process. I mean, to me, and I think to the majority of our community, it's obvious that the problem is very severe. We see it on our streets wherever we live, and it's getting worse, and it's unconscionable, and we need to do more. And getting the accurate count, again, I don't know how possible it is. I'd like to see what other cities have done as far as methodologies, but again, we took care of people. We used the lingo when I was working at the 45th Street Clinic, at-risk homeless. The person was not unsheltered, but they were living on their friend's couch. And then they were gonna sleep outside for a little bit, and then they were gonna be, so that's a great question, because that would be, if there was some way to get that number, that would be nice and helpful. But the problem is so big, we're not gonna be able to snap our fingers and just do it, one thing. We're gonna have to do multiple strategies over time. We're gonna have to be patient. It's gonna be incremental. We're gonna have to look at different populations and prioritize, just like now, families with kids that are homeless are getting the highest priority. But I'm wholly confident we can do better, and we're going to do better.
We don't necessarily have time for one more if it's a really short question.
Nah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
You can call me.
Well, you can ask after. If you would like to go ahead and give a 30-second wrap up.
We covered a lot. I'm really excited about this job. I thought very, very hard whether it was something I should do or not. And I had a few people tell me, are you sure you want to do it? city council's pretty rough. And I tried to imagine not doing it, and I thought, you know what, this totally feels right. I feel like I'm really confident that I can bring some healthy energy to the council and to our city. I think it's going to be beneficial. We've got some big problems ahead of us, but I'm really looking forward to making things, put them in a better place.
Thank you very much.